Adrian always spoke in futures. While others counted hours and tasks, Adrian counted visions, grand ideas scribbled in notebooks, whispered under breath, outlined in color-coded sticky notes. Everyone around him saw the same thing, potential. That dangerous, intoxicating word. He was the kind of person you believed in until you had to wait for him to actually do something. Adrian lived in a tiny apartment cluttered with half-started projects, a podcast mic still in its box, a whiteboard filled with startup concepts, unopened books on leadership. The coffee table was covered with energy drink cans and untouched investor pitch decks. His walls were covered in dreams, but his inbox was full of "Are you still interested?" emails. Deep down, Adrian feared a truth he never dared say out loud: what if I'm not destined, just delusional? One night, at a rooftop networking event he almost didn't attend, everything changed. Under the hum of string lights and startup buzzwords, he met Felix, sharp-eyed, the type who looked like he already owned the future. Felix listened as Adrian poured out yet another world-changing idea, then smiled and said, "You've got the spark. I've got the fuel." Adrian laughed until he realized Felix wasn't joking. In the days that followed, Felix moved fast. He had contacts, resources, and best of all, belief. He offered Adrian a deal: he'd handle the logistics, assemble a team, even secure early funding. All Adrian had to do was dream big and let him handle the boring parts. And Adrian, he said yes, too fast, too easily. For the first time, his ideas were moving. Things were happening. People returned his calls. Websites launched. Meetings were booked. Adrian felt alive. Seen. But then the patterns began. Felix was vague about the terms. He'd always brush aside questions like, "Don't worry, you're the visionary. Let me deal with the back end." Strange faces began entering Adrian's life: "Help us," he was told. But they never really answered to him. And when Adrian pushed back, Felix would pause and say with a slight smile, "You want this to work, don't you?" Adrian nodded. Of course he did. But something was shifting, subtly, dangerously. And he hadn't yet realized he wasn't the one building the dream. He was being built into someone else's. Marla didn't dream. She delivered. While others chased ideas, she chased checklists. Her mornings began before the sun, her nights ended with blueprints and burnout. To the outside world, she was a machine, disciplined, efficient, unstoppable. But the truth? She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, the kind that came from building other people's castles, brick by brick, while convincing yourself the kingdom would one day be yours. Marla had spent the last 6 years under the mentorship of Ronald, a revered business leader who took her in when she was just a hungry intern. He taught her everything: how to negotiate deals, manage chaos, lead with power. He called her his right hand, even hinted that one day she'd take over the company. And she believed him. So Marla worked harder. Took on more. Skipped vacations. Managed teams. Put out fires. She wasn't just the engine, she was the entire damn vehicle. And Ronald? He praised her, but always with a leash. Not yet. But soon. You're getting there. Then, one day, without warning, Ronald announced his retirement. No warning. No discussion. Just an email to the board and a handshake. And his replacement, not Marla. Instead, a polished stranger named Theo walked in, introduced as the fresh vision the company needed. Theo shook her hand and smiled, saying, "I've heard a lot about the incredible work you've done, supporting Adrian's blueprint." Marla blinked. Adrian's what? Theo gestured to a binder tucked under his arm. The strategic foundation, all from this guy named Adrian. Ronald built the entire company's framework of his ideas. Said they were revolutionary. We are just here to scale them now. Something cold crawled up Marla's spine. She returned to her office, numb, and opened the company archives. There it was, a file buried in the early documentation, vision plan, Adrian R. The name meant nothing to her. But his ideas. They were everything she'd worked for. Every goal. Every metric. Every late night she bled for was someone else's dream. She wasn't the architect. She was the laborer. The scaffolding. The silent executor. Marla stared at her reflection in the office window, suit crisp, posture perfect, and for the first time, she didn't see a leader. She saw a pawn. Kellan didn't ask for attention, he absorbed it. He was the kind of man people leaned toward without realizing. His laugh filled rooms. His opinions ended debates. His presence was magnetic. Parties stopped when he arrived. Conversations circled back to him like he was gravity. And yet, his phone never rang anymore. Not unless someone wanted something from him, or worse, wanted to confront him. The truth started dripping in slowly, through breakups that felt colder than they should have, friends who distanced themselves without explanation, and a job that let him go with no exit interview, just a silence that said, "We've had enough." He didn't understand. He always gave so much advice, time, energy, even money when he had it. But when he sat across from Darren, an old friend who finally agreed to meet after months of dodging him, the air grew heavy with unspoken truths. Kellan, Darren said quietly, "You drain people. You suck them dry and leave them feeling guilty for not giving you more." Kellan froze. The words hit like a slap. "I've defended you for years," Darren continued. "But honestly, you take. You charm your way in a feed of people's energy, of their belief in you." Conversations circled back to him like he was gravity. And yet, his phone never rang anymore. Not unless someone wanted something from him, or worse, wanted to confront him. The truth started dripping in slowly, through breakups that felt colder than they should have, friends who distanced themselves without explanation, and a job that let him go with no exit interview, just a silence that said, "We've had enough." He didn't understand. He always gave so much advice, time, energy, even money when he had it. But when he sat across from Darren, an old friend who finally agreed to meet after months of dodging him, the air grew heavy with unspoken truths. "Kellan," Darren said quietly, "You drain people. You suck them dry and leave them feeling guilty for not giving you more." Kellan froze. The words hit like a slap. "I've defended you for years," Darren continued. "But honestly, you take. You charm your way in a feed of people's energy, of their belief in you." He replaced it with performance, charisma, control. He drained people to avoid admitting he'd been emptied himself. And now, he was a mirror of what had broken him. Kellan sat in the silence of his empty apartment and asked the question he'd never dared, "If I'm not the star of the story, am I the villain?" Adrian was finally being called a genius, and for once, he didn't feel like a fraud. His inbox overflowed with meeting invites. Startups quoted his ideas. Investors used his language. Podcasts requested interviews. Felix told him he was trending. "You're finally becoming the face," Felix said, grinning over iced coffee like a proud handler. And yet, something felt off. Every time Adrian asked about budget details or team hires, Felix deflected. "Stay in your zone of genius. Let me handle the rest." At first, Adrian welcomed it. Delegation was power, right? He told himself this is how great visionaries work, through people. But cracks started showing. One morning, a woman named Marla showed up on a Zoom call. Felix introduced her as the new operations lead. She didn't smile. She barely acknowledged Adrian. But her background was elite. Her performance, impeccable. Felix raved about her in every meeting. "She gets it done, no questions asked. Exactly what you needed." Still, Adrian noticed things. Marla always referenced frameworks he hadn't signed off on. Roadmaps he didn't recognize. Documents with his name attached, but not his words. When he confronted Felix, Felix simply laughed. "Relax. We're just building from your early outlines. You've said so much over the years, we are just packaging it." That night, plagued with doubt, Adrian logged into the company's shared drive. He typed his name into the archive folder. What he found chilled him. A document labeled Targets by Type. It wasn't just strategy. It was a playbook. A list of people Felix had recruited to help Adrian, all labeled with behavioral notes. Type A. Doer. Will work herself into the ground. Keep promises vague. Type B. Dreamers. Good for emotional buy-in. Not task-focused. Type C. Drainers. Avoid. Unless they have influence. Each name had a color-coded tag: use, keep, discard. At the top of the list, Marla. Highlighted in green. Next to her name, unaware. Produces results. Don't let her wake up. At the bottom, under a faded entry, Kellan, former dreamer. Unstable. Discarded. Adrian's stomach turned. This wasn't strategy. It was manipulation. He wasn't leading a team, he was fronting a machine. And the worst part, he didn't know if it was Felix pulling the strings or if he had become the puppet master himself. Marla didn't burn out. She imploded. The signs had been there: tremors in her hands, the migraines that throbbed through meetings, forgotten meals, the gnawing emptiness that no success could fill. But she kept pushing. That was who she was, the doer. The finisher. The one everyone relied on. Until one morning, she collapsed in the elevator. Not from illness, but from exhaustion. A full-body surrender. Her doctor didn't mince words. Your body's not tired. It's in revolt. She was prescribed rest, but rest felt like failure. So instead, Marla returned to work. Quietly. Carefully. She said nothing to Theo. Nothing to the board. She just observed. And that's when she noticed something terrifying. She was surrounded by strangers working on a vision she didn't recognize, and yet every detail still had her fingerprints on it. A logo she had designed. A launch plan she had outlined, but now, credited to someone else. She pulled up archived meeting notes. Every one of them referenced Adrian's system, Adrian's original vision, Adrian's philosophy of growth. The name kept appearing like a ghost she'd never met. And then, she found the document, Strategic Blueprint, Adrian R. She scanned the file, line by line. The words were bold, confident, abstract, but familiar. Too familiar. Because they were her execution plans, only inverted. She'd taken those vague, dreamy ideas and turned them into reality. And now, they were being handed back to her like sacred scripture, as if she'd never bled for them. She hadn't been leading. She'd been following a man she'd never met. She stormed into Theo's office the next day. Who is Adrian R? Theo didn't even look up. The visionary. The engine behind the whole system. Didn't Ronald ever tell you? This was his design. We just kept you on to keep it running. Marla didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just turned and walked. She expected to feel free. Vindicated. Liberated from a machine that used her. But instead, her chest felt hollow. Her pulse thundered with one aching truth: if I wasn't building my own dream, then what am I without the work? She sat alone in the stairwell, sweat-soaked and trembling, as the full weight of it hit her. She had mastered the art of execution, but never asked herself why. She wasn't just burned out. She was identityless. Directionless. She had built an empire of action, with no soul of her own in it. Without someone else's vision, she didn't know what her own was. Kellan was unraveling, and he knew it. Therapy sessions became his confessional, the place where walls cracked and memories bled through. His therapist, Dr. Patel, had watched the slow collapse, the bright charisma replaced by exhaustion, the forced laughter thinning to silence. One evening, as rain tapped lightly against the clinic window, Kellan finally laid it all bare. I used to have a dream, a real one. He described it carefully: the podcast idea, the documentary series he'd envisioned. Stories that mattered. Voices unheard. I was going to change how stories are told. Make people feel. Make them think. make them act. But then came the meeting. The one with Adrian. He was supposed to be my partner. He promised he believed in the vision. Kellan's hands trembled. But he vanished. Didn't return calls. Suddenly, he was working with others and making moves without me. I waited. Hoped. But the dream died. Dr. Patel asked gently, what did that feel like? Kellan swallowed hard. Like someone ripped out my heart and handed me a hollow shell. I didn't just lose a partner. I lost myself. He leaned back, eyes distant. After that, I stopped dreaming. I stopped trying. I became this. He gestured around the sterile room, his voice cracking. A man who takes because he has nothing left to give. Tears welled, but Kellan didn't wipe them away. I became the very thing I feared, a drainer. The session ended with no easy answers. Just a man haunted by what was taken and what he lost. But outside, in the cold dark, a new question grew, could he ever reclaim the dreamer he was? Or was that chapter forever closed? There comes a moment when the light cracks, and all you see is yourself. Adrian sat alone in a glass-walled conference room that once buzzed with energy. Now, only silence remained. Felix was gone, vanished into a new opportunity, leaving behind a trail of unanswered emails and frozen bank accounts. Adrian opened his laptop and stared at a headline on a blog someone forwarded to him, the visionary who let others do the work. He didn't read the article. He didn't have to. He knew what it would say. Knew it was true. His ideas had been brilliant. But the execution, that had always belonged to others. He had dreamed but also drained. Masked it behind charisma, wrapped it in leadership. I didn't guide people. I used them. For the first time, the word manipulator echoed in his head, not as an insult but a diagnosis. Across the city, Marla stared at a blank page in a co-working space. No team. No plan. No target. Just space. She thought leaving the company would feel like freedom. But it felt more like vertigo. For years, she had been the engine of other people's visions. Now, she couldn't even decide what font to use on her personal website. She scribbled one question again and again in the margin of her notebook, who am I when I'm not doing something for someone else? She wasn't addicted to hard work. She was addicted to purpose, even if it wasn't hers. She remembered a moment from the past year, Theo praising her after a successful campaign, her body aching from no sleep, yet still smiling. Now, it made her stomach turn. I didn't just overwork. I disappeared inside the work. And Kellan stood in front of a crowd for the first time in years. Not as a speaker, not as a star, but as a guest on someone else's podcast. The host asked, what does success mean to you now? Kellan hesitated, then said, I used to think it meant being admired. Heard. Followed. Now I think it means being honest even when it kills your image. He paused. I drain people because I was empty. And I was empty because I gave up on who I used to be. In their own separate spaces, each of them looked in the mirror. And each one saw something they hadn't expected, not a dreamer. Not a doer. Not a drainer. But someone who had been all three, depending on what they lacked, what they feared, and what they refused to face. The mirror had cracked. Now came the choice, build a new self from the fragments, or hide behind the old mask again. Change didn't come like a lightning bolt. It crept in, as a quiet decision. Kellan sat at a community cafe, scribbling into a worn journal. Not content. Not strategy. Stories. The kind he once burned to tell. He didn't have a budget. Or a partner. Or a platform. But he had a voice again. He bought a cheap mic, started recording in his apartment, where the walls echoed back at him. He didn't care. His first episode was called The Dream I Abandoned. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect.